But first to Cameroon, where we are getting reports that one of the main opposition leaders has been arrested. Maurice Kamto, leader of the Cameroon Renaissance movement, claims he won the election held in October last year. The official figures show the opposition group taking only 14% of the vote, in second place behind the president, Paul Biya, who has been in power for 36 years. Now, the government strongly denies electoral fraud. Mr. Kamto urged protesters to join demonstrations last Saturday to challenge this result and to stand up against the government, which he says is suppressing the voice of the opposition. During these protests, the security forces used tear gas and live ammunition. To know more about what's going on, I spoke to Mr. Kamto's lawyer, Agbor Balla. I asked him if he knew why Mr. Kamto was arrested.
No reason has been given, but we know that Professor Fugre, who is the treasurer of the party, who had been arrested, and others who had been arrested. And if you follow the press conference of the Minister of Communication and that of Territorial Administration, clearly their statements led to the fact that they were accused of insurrection and also destruction of public property.
Could you tell us why there were these need for these protests? What were people protesting against?
Professor Maurice Kamto, the president of the MRC party, who was the runner-up during the last election, had called for this series of protests to protest against electoral hold-up because he was of the opinion that he won the election, and also to protest against the killings in the southwest and the northwest regions of the country. As you're well aware, there have been a protracted struggle, crisis in Anglophone Cameroon that started in October 2016, which has resulted in the loss of many lives, close to 170 villages that have been burned down. About 500,000 people are internally displaced. So they were clamoring to call the attention of the national and international community and for the need for government to try to find a long-lasting solution to the crisis.
When you mentioned two reasons then, you spoke about that protracted violence, protests against that. But the second one that you say was that Mr. Kamto is of the opinion that he won the last election. It's one thing to know, and it's another thing to be having an opinion to win an election. That's already treading on very thin ice to claim that you won the election. How does he know that?
If you follow the process, Mr. Kamto had announced that from information that he had gathered from the polling station and from his polling officers on the ground, he had won the elections. But we all know that these elections were not free and fair, where the Electoral Commission, ELECAM, is not an independent body. I think overall it's within the confines of that there's clamor for a more transparent process in the election process. It's true that you can debate whether he won the elections or not, but he has genuine reasons to believe that he had won the elections.
But surely, I mean, according to Cameroon's Electoral Commission, Mr. Kamto came second, and Paul Biya, the president, his camp or his group firmly deny all allegations of electoral fraud. Surely a claim like this is going to further destabilize an already very fragile situation in the country.
They would never accept the fact that the elections where there was fraud during the elections. This is a country where we've had a history of petitions and complaints about election rigging, and the Electoral Commission is not independent. You know, there is a need for a broad-based dialogue in Cameroon, where all the stakeholders, all the interested parties, be the politicians, civil society, they have to sit on the table and try to address the root causes of the problems facing the country. The country cannot move forward without us addressing the problems. I mean, we need to go back to the form of a state. There's a need for a truth and reconciliation and a broad-based conference. So it's not about Professor Maurice Kamto. It's not necessarily about the Anglophone crisis, but I think it's the existence of Cameroon, the need for political reform, and the need for genuine dialogue and discussions.